I've used a lot of meal services, but Hungry Root truly stands out because it's built around the way real families live and eat. They don't just send meal kits. They personalize your grocery cart and meal plan based on your preferences and dietary goals. All I had to do was take a short quiz, and right away, their smart cart technology started building a cart that fit how we eat. Now, each week feels easier, like someone else is doing the thinking for me. I've been focused on cleaner eating lately, and I love that Hungry Root keeps out over 200 additives, including things like high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners. Their meats are hormone and antibiotic free, and the produce options include organic and non GMO picks. They also stock brands I already trust, like Oatly, Vital Farms, and Harmless Harvest. One of our favorite meals has been the teriyaki salmon with green beans, light, flavorful, and done in 12 minutes flat. Plus, I've noticed we waste less food, spend less time shopping, and even save money by skipping those impulse grocery buys. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg and use code Dr. Meg. That's hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg. Code Dr. Meg to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg. Code Dr. Meg.
On today's episode of Parenting Great Kids.
Nearly 1 in 3 teens struggles with anxiety. In today's world, parents play a bigger role than ever in shaping their child's mental well-being. But with so much information and misinformation out there, knowing how to help isn't always clear. Enter Dr. Jodi Aman, a psychotherapist, author, and YouTuber with nearly 3 decades of experience helping parents, educators, and teens navigate anxiety, trauma, and the pressures of modern life.
Welcome to Parenting Great Kids. Here's your host, Dr. Meg Meeker.
Welcome, Dr. Aman.
Thank you so much.
I love my podcast, and I will confess that often I choose guests who I think are going to help me.
Yes. As a therapist too, right? We take in clients that were like, okay.
Here we go. Yeah. For the older people out there, who are the Gen Z people?
Well, really they're defined because they had a smartphone from middle school. The majority started using a smartphone. So that's what distinguishes them from millennials, because they were about in college or a little bit older by the time they got into smartphones were popular. And so that made a huge difference in brain development, and so you see a huge difference in those two generations. There's some things that are similar, of course, but
because I appreciate that, because I've always wondered, do you do Gen Z or define Gen Z by their age or by, but this is a great way to think about it. Middle school cell phones. I see as a pediatrician, not as a therapist, a big rise in anxiety and depression and mental health struggles among kids. I see kids till actually about 20. Where is this coming from?
Well, I think there's a few different factors that's raising it. One is Western culture in general, like our individualism. Humans are supposed to live in communities, and we're living in smaller and smaller households. They've done studies that kids who live with grandparents or multi-generations or bigger families actually have better mental health. So our smaller and smaller households do contribute to us being more and more isolated, which does contribute to higher levels of anxiety and depression because we're in our head a lot. And actually, our brain is developed for millions of years to solve problems, and we have less problems to solve, especially if we're isolated, we have less problems to solve. And then we also have less problems to solve because in modern world, there's so much convenience that we're doing less survival chores to survive. And so our mind just has a lot of extra space, and it goes into negative because it wants to protect you, and it thinks that something's got to be wrong. Mm-hmm. We have to solve some problems. We've always, our organism has always had to solve some problems to survive, and we don't have to. in a lot of luxurious cultures don't have to.
Well, and that makes kids feel crazier because, in my experience, they have everything. They have a beautiful home. They have a good school. They have this and this and this, and that they're anxious. And then they feel, what's wrong with me? Because I should be happy, and so on and so forth. And then a lot of these problems arise.
Exactly. They
Yeah,
feel out of control, right?
they're out of
Because if you're
control.
anxious and you don't know why, there's no reason for it, then it feels even more out of control and just feeds the anxiety.
Mhm. So is what I hear you saying that you talk about survival activities, that a lot of people with anxiety just don't have enough to do, or they should be engaged in other things.
Yeah, when we had to work the farm, we had to go to school, work the farm, take care of things, help our brothers and sisters. We had to do a lot of things. In all of the 100 years ago, we didn't have grocery stores like we do now, and we had to make everything ourselves, our clothes, our food, our everything. And so we had to fix our house every day, you know? So there was a lot to do all the time, and it feels like we have more and more to do, but really we have more pressure
Right.
now. Kids have more time on their hands, but more pressure to do stuff. So it's actually a myth that we have more to do, and there's like so much to do in a fast-paced culture, and there's so much to do, and these kids are so busy. They're busy, but it's like busy having pressure
Right.
instead of busy like doing work to survive, and then having some fun sometimes as well.
What is the pressure they feel, and where does it come from?
I think the pressure is to succeed or to meet these unrealistic high expectations, to be young, cool, pretty, smart, get the best of this music, get all the best parts of the show, and to be the best. And that's because comparison culture is out of control with screens. So with the rise of screen time, there's several messages that kids are getting all the time that's also contributing to their mental health problems. And one is this explosion of comparison culture. Comparison culture, again, comes from Western culture because we have these expectations. So we're always kind of comparing ourselves to make sure we're living up. Because if we don't meet expectations, the fear is that we'll be left out. And if you're left out of the community, you can't survive out there. That's what our brain thinks because it was developed during hunter-gatherer times for so long. And this modern time is very, very short comparatively. We're not going to lose those survival skills anyway. So we're so concerned that we're going to not meet expectations and be left out that we really have a lot of pressure to meet them, to exceed them, to not be the one that's lacking. But because these expectations are so high and unrealistic, we're always feeling inadequate. We're always feeling out of control and powerless. And that's increasing our anxiety, but also making us not like ourselves very much, not trust ourselves very much. We don't see ourselves as skilled or adaptable, even though we are.
It's interesting because I've been doing some work on a podcast on dating. And one of the things that has arisen is that a lot of girls, and probably boys too, they will date people that they don't necessarily like because they don't feel they're worth much. And they'll sort of date down, if you will. And it's interesting because the self-esteem issues are really pretty rampantly negative out there. Now, do kids get pressure to be perfect and to succeed and to perform and everything from parents or from peers on social media, or both?
I think it's in our culture, so it's everywhere. It's from TV shows, it's comparison culture from social media, it's from their peers. They're all afraid. Usually they feel that pressure from their parents. Sometimes their parents aren't giving pressure, but they're assuming it. Some parents do give pressure, of course, but so it's coming from within because they have this motivation not to be left out or not to be seen as inadequate, but they're still judging themselves as inadequate anyway. they're working hard not to, but they are anyway. That feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem is hand in hand with depression and anxiety. It's like that's what causes depression and anxiety. And then, we think of like depression and anxiety causing low self-esteem, but it's the opposite. It's the not trusting ourselves and not liking ourselves that is causing the anxiety and the depression.
Yeah, sort of me against me. I don't like me. I don't like who I am. And then it arises. So you talk about digital depression. I assume that you're talking about depression that stems from constantly feeling inadequate and constantly feeling you're not as pretty, you're not as smart, so on and so forth. It really has become an addictive behavior with many kids, because I actually had a young gal who tried to commit suicide. She's beautiful, 15, doesn't matter if she's beautiful or not, 15 years old, and admitted later on that social media had played a part, because whenever she went on and saw her friends with a boyfriend or friends doing this, she just felt so badly about herself. So I said, okay, well, let's, on your way out in your recovery, one of the things that we need to do is, sort of, wean you from a lot of social media. And she said, I can't. I said, but it almost killed you. I know, but I can't. So where does that stem from, the addiction to something that's so bad for them?
There's a couple things psychologically and physiologically that's going on. That fear of missing out. If you miss out on something, then you might not be part of a conversation or not understand what's going on in a conversation. And that might have you left out. That might make you embarrass yourself. So psychologically and relationally, that's what's happening. They don't want to miss anything, because if there was a problem as well, or if there's something good or something to talk about, they don't want to be out of the loop. And then it's going to be a problem in the future. They're going to embarrass themselves. If there was a problem and they didn't know about it and went in like unprepared or something, that's what they're really afraid of. The other thing is there's a dopamine issue with social media, and that notifications that's constant is they're getting this little thing of dopamine. It's actually interrupting their dopamine cycle. Mm-hmm. Because they're not stimulating their dopamine in a regular way, and it's not sustainable. So they have to keep scrolling, doom scrolling. And most research says the longer that teenagers spend on social media, the more depressed and anxious that they get. And even an hour break to take a walk or do something else significantly helps them feel better. I mean, they're comparing people's highlight reel to their own backstage mess. Mm-hmm. So they're never going to come up feeling good about themselves. They're always going to look for where the problem is, because they're trying to mitigate the risk. Mm-hmm. There's no risk, but they're trying to mitigate the risk of like being kicked out of the friend group or something like that.
Yeah.
And then dying in the woods somewhere.
You really can see how tangled up their feelings can get. What are some of the ways that parents unintentionally contribute to the anxiety? Because I know we've talked about, kids on digital media, digital platforms, and how that contributes to it. But what role do parents play in that? Because, I mean, as one who has grown kids, I know I'm responsible for every bad thing that ever happened to them, right?
You are not.
You are not.
You are not responsible.
Yeah.
As parents, like it's guesswork so much of the time. And so it's like trial and error. But what sometimes parents with great intentions try to minimize someone's anxiety, because they think that if they could kind of distract them or something, that they won't put as much meaning around it. Sometimes that has a counter effect, because when kids don't feel validated, they put more meaning around it, and they feel validated or that you don't understand, and they double down and defend their anxiety. So their anxiety is going to grow instead of go away. But it does work for some people. But if you minimize your kid's anxiety, they'll hold on to it much tighter. And so you don't want to do that. We want to validate and be like, I understand how you're feeling. That makes it, even if it doesn't make sense to you.
Right.
I had this parent and child, and the mom was like, I feel like there's no like robustness in her because she's really nervous about getting a cold. She has a lot of anxiety about getting sick at school and then missing school and missing work and having to make it up. She has so much anxiety when she's around someone sick that she's going to get sick. And it was interesting because this mom couldn't relate, and she thought that was kind of weak and how is she going to live her life? But this mom was afraid of driving, like in winter conditions, afraid of driving over bridges. But in her mom's mind, that was a rational fear because that's dangerous to drive in the snow. But she couldn't understand, and her daughter drove fine all over the place. So they couldn't understand each other's anxiety. And one seemed logical and the other one didn't to the other person. So it's really interesting. Anxiety, we don't understand it, but we can understand it. We could just be like, I understand why that upsets you or makes you nervous. That compassion goes a really long way.
Well, it makes the child feel less crazy, because I think if you come along and say, well, I don't want to drive in the snow, but you're crazy because you don't want to get sick. It makes the kid feel, crazy
Yeah.
from the parent
Yeah.
saying, that I'm not. So if you have a child come in 16, 17 years of age, first of all, do you work with the child and the parent together or
sometimes
separately? Together?
Yes. Most of the time I see them a couple of times at least together, even if I'm talking to the young person, if there's something that I know it would be helpful to I'm a mom, so I know I try to bring the parents in. We don't heal in isolation. Most of our problems come from isolation. So I want to get people together. Sometimes people can't trust their parents, and so we might have to find somebody else. But often, especially in private practice, the parents are involved. Not always. But what I do tell the young person and the parent is like, we're not going to leave you here. No, we're not good. There's a lot of ways to get better. You don't have to feel like this forever. This is a regular human response to our modern world. You're not crazy, and we're not going to leave you here. We're going to try one thing at a time, and and we're going to find the thing that works, because there's so many different ways to get over anxiety, to rationalize your way out of it. And I tell parents to tell their kids that too. Tell them that we're not going to leave you here. We're smart. We're going to figure this out. We're going to get you the help you need, and we're not leaving you here.
So important because, moving on to depression tells you you're stuck, you're done, it's over, don't even try. Well, that's, the voice, if you will, of depression. But the same thing with anxiety, it can feel so overwhelming that I think just telling parents and kids there is a way out. I have seen it. I'm with you. We will figure this out is huge to kids. So you have a 17-year-old and she comes in and and she has anxiety, and you've talked with her about where the anxiety is coming from, just where, like you and I have talked about. And you tell her a lot of it could be because of the comparison and the culture and social media. Where do you go from there?
Actually, young people really like to know how the brain works. If we demystify anxiety and talk a little bit about the neuroscience so they understand what's happening, it demystifies it. That's one way anxiety has power over us, by being so mysterious. And it comes whenever. I don't know why it's here. I don't know why it came. And those kind of things really make people feel more and more powerless and give the anxiety more power. And so if I demystify by explaining what it is, I would say, this is anecdotal, but I would say about 50% of the anxiety is gone. Sometimes people don't need anything else. They just need to understand that. I did write a book. I don't know if you know this, but I have a book for teens, Anxiety, I'm So Done With You. It's a teen guide to ditching toxic stress. And, and I talk about it in there. I explain the biology of anxiety so people could see what's happening. And then they know the 2 steps to work out of it because they understand it now.
Yep.
And they understand it's not them and they're not crazy. And then, they understand that this is a concept that's not part of their identity. So helpful.
It's interesting because I've landed on a similar concept in just dealing with kids. And one of the things I try to do would be to sort of separate the kid from anxiety, sort of say, if you had a broken leg you're not broken. You can see this broken like it's there. Anxiety is just something that lives in you that you have to deal with, but it isn't who you are. Because I think if you're have panic attacks or you're having depression in particular, kids feel that they are depression. They're that they have an illness and this is who they are. And I think that's important for parents to recognize too. It's an illness they live with, but
Yeah,
it's
well,
not.
I would even not even say that because, that's still the medical model. We're trying to get away from that medical model that it's an illness within us. It's a concept that lives. It's a regular human reaction to our culture,
Yeah.
right? But if we separate, I like the idea of separating our identity from anxiety because it's like I am anxious. I do think it's part of who they are, and like you could see that the titles of my books already is pulling that out, right? Anxiety is like a personified person that you're breaking up with. Like, I'm done with you. Like, we're breaking up. And my first book, my book for adults, is You Want Anxiety Zero. So again, it's an entity outside of you that you could have a relationship with, and you could change your relationship, and you could say, no more anxiety, get away from me.
Mm-hmm.
That's really powerful.
Because it's so all consuming. I've experienced pretty bad depression, but I've never experienced panic attacks or bad anxiety, and it feels this thing owns you. And it can feel so overwhelming, but just to sort of, if you can, in a way, mentally compartmentalize it and say, this is something that's working, that isn't you. So you talk to the kids. I love it. You talk to them about the neuroscience and the body's reaction and where it comes from physiologically. And then where do you go? The kid says, okay, I understand that, but I'm still going home and having terrible panic attacks. How do you walk them through that?
Everyone's really different. So you're looking for the context of anxiety. Anxiety and depression come out of a context. They're not like the illness inside of a person. They come from a context. So as you're getting to know them, you're getting to know some of the things that are triggering anxiety, some of the things that they're worried about. I try to get the exact words. Anxiety could have you worried about all kinds of different things. Depression could have you upset and judging all kinds of different things. So I'm trying to get the words and a context, either inside their mind or in their world. Much of the time, it's a problem in a friend group or a problem in a romantic relationship that has triggered it. Sometimes it's a problem in the household or with somebody that has triggered anxiety, or something is bothering them or making them feel out of control that's adding to it in the moment. We're really deconstructing those thoughts that our anxiety is making sound really true. They're lies, right? They're lies, these negative lies that we tell ourselves, this inner critic that's so nasty and will spin anything negative to you. And we deconstruct those ideas so they stop believing them. They realize it's just anxiety lying to them, and they stop believing, and then their anxiety is going to go down.
What are some of the most common themes that you see in kids that are precipitating the anxiety, or are there? Is it social anxiety at school? Is it anxiety over parents? Is it anxiety over, and I know it's hard, it's really hard to, generalize, but are there common themes that you see in the Gen Z kids?
Yeah, people are very worried about how they're going to be seen or judged. And it might be around something specific. So you have a lot of social anxiety because they really feel like they're in a fishbowl all the time. And they think that if they do something wrong, people are going to notice or see them. They think that people could see this inner sadness in them, whatever they think their inadequacies are. They're really afraid that everyone could just see that by looking at them. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a huge one. Of course, there's other ones too. Sometimes they're in a group, they're so isolated, or they become in a group, but everyone in the group is depressed. And so there's reason to stay sad because then you belong, and everyone's kind of commiserating, and it's a way to bond together. And then who wants to get better? And then you're alone. Mm-hmm. So that happens. I see that sometimes, but this great isolation, and then feeling like they don't like themselves, and so they're too vulnerable to be in relationships or trust people because they really don't think they're adequate enough.
Some days, parenting feels like chasing moments that never quite land. You ask a question, they shrug. You try again, they look at their screen. And you wonder, why is this so hard? That's why I love FamGabs. It's a 70-card deck created by a child therapist who spent 16 years working directly with families, helping parents and kids break through the awkward one-word answers and really connect. The questions are open-ended, thoughtfully chosen, and designed to get your child talking and keep the conversation going. There are even bonus cards just for parents to help you build your confidence in your connection toolbox. If you've ever wished for a better way to understand your child or just to have more meaningful conversations as a family, FamGabs is such a gift. Search FamGabs on Amazon and use promo code Dr. Meg Pod during checkout to get 10% off your order. That's FAMGABS on Amazon. Use promo code Dr. Meg Pod and get 10% off your order. You know that moment when your child lights up because something finally clicks? That's what every parent wants, to see their child thrive. But when school just isn't the right fit, that joy can fade. That's why I want to tell you about K-12 powered schools. These are tuition-free, accredited online public schools for kindergarten through 12th grade. They're designed to meet your child where they are so they can learn at their own pace, in their own space, and a curriculum that fits their unique learning style. And here's what sets it apart. This isn't homeschooling. You're not the teacher. K-12's state-certified online educators are trained to make lessons interactive and engaging using innovative technology. And your child still gets social experiences, clubs, extracurriculars, even in-person events. K-12 has helped over 3 million families give their kids the tools to thrive, and they've been doing it for more than 25 years. It could be exactly what your child needs. Visit k12.com/Dr. Meg to find a tuition-free K-12 powered school near you and enroll today. That's k12./DRMEG, all caps.
If a child feels isolated, which they are, particularly during COVID, and they're not connecting with other people, does their anxiety come from that lack of connection, or where does the anxiety there come from?
Yeah. So when you are isolated, you are in your head a lot and there's a lot of negativity in there. So when you're around less and less people, your image of yourself is going to go worse and worse and worse. We're social beings, are supposed to be around people. So isolation, and then isolation, the other thing that's happening in isolation is the dopamine issue is happening again. So when you're in isolation, you don't trigger your dopamine very much. And then you don't really care if you trigger your dopamine. So when I have a kid come to me in counseling, they're like, yeah, I don't think I could get better, but I don't really care if I get better. Like, I don't care if I ever get better. I know that that's a symptom of incredible isolation. They probably sleep all day and are up all night, because when they don't care, that means they have not had any dopamine. Mm-hmm. And so they don't even care about getting dopamine, So when it's a younger person or someone who has other people around, the other people around have to get them out and doing stuff. Mm-hmm. So their parents have to take them out of the house, get them stimulated somehow. It comes back. That happened with people in COVID too. Their dopamine wasn't triggering as much because they were in isolation and not doing so much and bored. But once we could get them out and doing stuff or figuring something out, something to do during that time, that comes back. Like our brain adjust back to having the dopamine again and being interested in things again. So when someone's not interested, that's not a symptom of depression. It's a symptom of isolation.
Mm-hmm. What if a kid comes to you because kids are kids, they're 15 years old and, really confused. And they say, I'm anxious. And you say, well, where do you think it's coming from? And they have no idea. So do you just keep asking a bunch of questions? Because I know a lot of parents, and obviously parents don't want to be a therapist to their child, but parents will come to me and go, I have no idea what's happening. And she seems not to know what's happening. So
that makes a kid feel out of control, actually. So if you say, where's this coming from? And they don't know, they're more of a panic. They're like, well, I should know.
Exactly.
They already think that they should know. And so that's what I mean by, the mystery of anxiety makes people feel really powerless. I don't think I'd ask a kid, where do you think it's coming from? I say, what are you anxious about? What are you worried about? So they're going to start giving me the context of those worried thoughts, which they do know that answer. They don't know why they started to worry about this or why anxiety started. But I know why. It's because our culture, it's a cultural issue, right? It's a regular human response to our culture. I know why everybody's anxious because they're human. And they've done less chores. They have more access to luxury and not having to do things and conveniences. And so they're doing less and they don't see themselves as skilled and they don't see themselves as adaptable because they're not having those kind of challenges anymore trying to problem solve. So their mind's trying to solve problems by making up problems and they're unsolvable because it's like, what if this bad thing happens? Well, that's not happening. So you can't solve it because it's not happening. Right? So it feels unsolvable, and it creates panic. So I know why it's happening. I would never ask somebody that. I actually am telling them why. But first of all, I would ask, like, what are you worried about? What are you worried about? That they could say. I'm worried about someone breaking in my house. I'm worried about if my mom gets hit by a car, gets in a car accident. I'm worried that I won't like it at school or I'll be uncomfortable there or I'll need to leave and I can't leave. I'll bleed through my clothes, like something, I'll faint or start screaming in the middle of the class. People have these fears that they'll embarrass themselves. Is a huge one.
Talk about kids who are anxious. And as you dig into the family dynamics, you find that their parents are incredibly anxious and they might be just sort of mopping it up from them. Do you see that very often? And if so, how do you approach that?
Yeah, we learn anxiety. And sometimes the kids, you're helping the kids get over it. And then, you have them help each other because then they could give tips to their mom how to help them get better. I remember my kids were anxious. I'm like, look at my face. If I'm not anxious, then you're okay. I had a model, like it's teachable to model that trust when there's nothing to worry about. And so, a lot of times you're helping the parents and the kids together and you're talking about it and they're learning about anxiety and a way to think about anxiety in a different way. Or they're reading my books. Parents and counselors and teachers are reading my books to help young people because they want to understand. And parents are like, the way we think about anxiety is we think about it in this medical model that it's an illness inside us that you just have to learn to live with or something like that. When a parent understands anxiety in that way, they're going to get better too.
Yeah. You have something called the Compass curriculum. How does that help teens and what is it? How does it work?
Okay, it's called a WISE intervention, which is a social psychological intervention that helps decrease symptoms of anxiety and depression. But it is a psychoeducational model and it's taught by lay people, so non-clinicians. So I designed a curriculum for high school health teachers because I knew the health teachers were teaching mental health, but they're actually teaching the medical model, which is hurting kids. I'm not saying all of them, but because health teachers most health teachers in our country curate their own curriculum. And they're not clinicians, so they're just looking online. And when you look online, it's like, what's an anxiety disorder and what's regular worries? Well, that's an us versus them mentality. And that's really emphasizing that if you have anxiety, something's wrong with you, which is devastating to the psyche. And there's nothing wrong with them. This is a regular human response to our world. And if they're not too busy wondering what's wrong with me and they understood anxiety, they could get rid of it and be happier. So that's what we want. So it's a curriculum for teachers to teach mental health in ways that actually help kids feel better. So it's tier one. Tier one means all the kids in the school get it. It's not just kids who are pulled out because they're anxious, because really most of the kids are anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Or they call it something else, but they're struggling, they're struggling with resistance maybe, or feeling like unmotivated or whatever. They call it other things, but really it's all the same hormone, right? It's all adrenaline.
I really love the approach because I think that our culture often tries to pathologize everything. That if you have anxiety, you really have a bad mental illness and, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? But like you said, it's part of a human response. And if we can normalize it and sort of say, this happens, and maybe at this point in your life, it feels exaggerated or is exaggerated by this and this and this, I think that it makes kids feel a little more normal. When kids hear they might have a mental illness, they feel like a freak. And I have a hard time getting kids to go to counseling because they said that means that I'm, insane or I'm mental or whatever. I said, that's not true. You would talk to therapists like you're just sitting here talking to me about this stuff. And so there's a lot of stigma they feel, but I think that that's a wonderful approach. So let's talk to the parent who's out there, and maybe they're a single parent or maybe they're married, and they have a child who's 12 years old and they are concerned the child has anxiety, and indeed the child does have anxiety. What are the 3 or 4 things they should do, and what are 3 or 4 things they should not do in order to help the child?
Okay, I would say listen and say understand, but and hear exactly what their worries are. Sometimes they have a question, and you could answer the question, their worry will go away. And so you want to know what the worries are. And then you could be like, yeah, I understand. I'm worried about different things sometimes, or when I was little, I was worried about things sometimes. So some kind of understanding so they don't feel so crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I used to worry about stuff like that, but then I learned that, we lock our doors and it's very safe, and there's these things that we do for safety. And so that's not something we have to worry about, whatever the worry is. I don't know what that is. I'm making that up. So one is listening for the worry and explaining why that's not something they need to worry about. If it is something they don't need to worry about, letting them know that, if people feel those ways, they could get better. They're not going to feel like this forever. That's really important. They're not feeling like this forever. The third one is, spend time with them, do fun things, distract them from it, get them out of their head. So those are the 3 things that I want parents to do. Not to do, we already mentioned it, but don't dismiss them. Don't be like, oh, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. Just don't think about it. Go to sleep. That sometimes makes them hold on to it more fully. Let's see, what are other don'ts? It's always hard because sometimes they don't want to do activities anymore when they're feeling anxious. So parents like, do I make them or do I let them not? That is hard. It depends. I can't give you a prescribed answer for that. Sometimes taking things off their plate is good, and sometimes it's counterproductive because then they have more free time to just think about the anxiety. You don't want that. You don't want more free time to talk about the anxiety. You want them doing things distracted. What's another no?
One of the things that I've always wanted to know is that there are some kids that'll have school anxiety, and they'll say, I just don't like being around a lot of people. I just don't want to walk in the lunchroom. So in a situation like that, where you can't just take the child out of school, as a parent, do you just say, sorry, you have to go to school, or you have to face it?
There's a lot to unpack in those little things that they said. And so I don't want to be around a lot of people, or I don't want to walk in the lunchroom. What happens when you walk in the lunchroom?
Mm-hmm.
What are you worried about that? What are you worried about? And then when they say the next thing, it's like, well, what worries you about that? You want to continue to unpack that fear, because anxiety is very vague and very general. And they're like, it'll be awful to walk in your lunchroom. And they're like, okay, I don't want to do that. But you have to really ask, because there might not, anxiety is quite thin.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it'll be awful. You're like, what's going to be awful? And when the kid starts asking anxiety those questions, then they're realizing that there's really nothing there to be afraid of. And so if you're asking questions of a young person, you might want to be like, well, what bothers you about walking in? You want to get the exact image that anxiety is putting in their head, that they're going to trip in the middle of the room and the whole room is going to be laughing. You want to know, like, how often does someone trip in the cafeteria? Have you ever seen that happen? How often, and so in all of your years at school, you've seen one time somebody fell a little bit in the corner and nobody said anything. You're trying to, anxiety's lying about something that's going to be awful that we know most of the time is not awful, or it usually doesn't happen, right? Them falling in the middle of the cafeteria and everybody seeing them. That would be it happened. I mean, it could happen. It's like, what if? But like, it's so rare that it's not worth having a panic attack about. And so you really want to unpack and really deconstruct this idea that anxiety has them so afraid of, that really is not afraid. One kid one time wouldn't tell me what he's afraid of. And then finally he's like, I had this dream about this ghost car coming down at the bus stop, like a ghost car. But once he said it out loud, I didn't judge it, but once he said it out loud, he started laughing. And once you get it out, it's like, that's silly. That would never happen. And it's like, so it's so rare. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's so rare that you've never even heard anyone talk about it ever. So, it's like, it's not a risk, So that really helps them. You kind of have to get into that magical thinking yourself to debunk these lies that anxiety is trying to tell them.
Well, and it's hard because as parents, when you see your child hurting, you want to go in and make them feel better and fix it and get the anxiety go away. But it just doesn't work that way. So, as we wind down here, can you tell parents when they should take their child to a therapist? Because a lot of parents say, well, I don't know if I should, or I don't know if I shouldn't. And I said, if it's a question, go.
Just go.
Yeah.
If you have access to it, if you have the time and access to it, there's no reason to wait. There's no reason. People wait 1 to 3 years before getting help, sometimes up to 10 years when they're older to get help for anxiety. If it's somebody young, get help right away, because you could nip it in the bud. You could nip it when it first starts. You might have people are so worried about the cost and everything. It might be one session with somebody young. Helping them think about anxiety differently could change their anxiety in one session. Sometimes it's like 2, they come back, they're better. You kind of exaggerate that and the anxiety's gone. And so there's no reason to wait. Why let this person suffer and your family suffering? Because it really affects the whole family.
My guest has been Dr. Jodi Aman. She's a psychotherapist and an author, and I would highly recommend her books. Will you tell us the titles?
Sure. Yeah. So one book is You Won Anxiety Zero. And then the teen one is Anxiety, I'm So Done With You. It's a teen guide to ditching toxic stress and hardwiring your brain for happiness. So those are available anywhere books are sold. My website's jodiaman.com.
Awesome. I love it. This has been so much fun. And as I anticipated, I've learned a lot. At least now I know what to tell my patients and their parents and what not to say.